Happy Sabbath. How are you all? I hope you all had a wonderful, wonderful week. Enjoy the sunshine as well as the rain. Tonight, I pray to the Lord to bless each one of us with his love, joy, and peace, and that he be present in our midst to grant us strength, courage, faith as we journey on this path of life. Last week, we talked about Abram ended up in Egypt because of the drought. And this week, we are going to talk about chapter 13, Lot and Abram. So let's read verse 1. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with them, into the Negev. And now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. And he journeyed on from the Negev as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. So Abram was expelled from Egypt after the adventure of the mixed up of Sarai and Pharaoh because of his lies. He now retraces his steps northward through the Negev, back to the hill country between Bethel and Ai, where he had previously built an altar. By this point, Abram had become rich in livestock, also in silver and gold. At this point, I like to bring something up. Do you remember in the New Testament, Jesus said something negative about wealthy people? You remember him said, it's very difficult for a rich man to go to heaven. It's like camel trying to go through the eye of a needle. He also mentioned that you cannot love him and money together. And most of us understand why Jesus used such a parable. You know, through TV shows and documentary, we have seen the decadent and self-indulgent lifestyle of some of the wealthy people. And we have seen how wealth can corrupt people and pull them away from God. But we also know that not all wealthy people are greedy and corrupted. And here is an example. In this passage, we see Abram. He was very rich, wealthy in stock, silver and gold. But God still loved him. So what made him different? If you remember the last chapter, Abram set up altar every time when he stopped. And if you read carefully in this passage, Abram again put God first. When he got to Canaan, the passage said Abram called upon the name of the Lord. A theologian once explained about wealth. He said wealth will always win over God when a person spends all his time in servicing wealth, meaning he spent his time to organize and planning and about making wealth and more wealth, and also spend time on how to spend his wealth to indulge according to his heart's desire. Perhaps that was what happened to Lot's family. Let's read on. Starting from verse 5. And Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together. For their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land. At this point, both Abram and Lot were rich in their livestock, and the herds became so big or too big for one area. There simply wasn't enough water or pasture to feed this large amount of animals. Abram recognized that he and Lot had to separate. And one of the reasons that there weren't enough pasture land or water for them is because there were other groups of people living there. The local people, called the Canaanites, and the Perizzites. So, how did Abram solve this problem? Abram had a talk with Lot. Let's read. Then Abraham said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar, which was a city very near the wicked city Sodom. And we will discuss this later. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from one another. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley, and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. Abram was tired of the servants fighting over land and water. He wants to preserve his relationship with his nephew, Lot. He knew the land cannot sustain them both, and they have to live separately. Abram allowed Lot to choose whichever land he would like to live, bringing his family and his herds. Here we see the faith of Abraham and the unselfishness of Abraham. He could have selected the best land for him and his family, a place that would be beneficial to him economically. But he allowed Lot to pick first. Abraham trusted in God's promise, and he knew God would provide for his needs. While Lot looked at the two options, he saw that the entire plain of Jordan was well watered. Well, Lot recently had experienced the effect of famine. Remember, they had to go south to Egypt to escape the drought? To avoid similar hardship, Lot made his choice for the fertile land in Jordan Valley. He observed it was like the garden of the Lord, like Eden, which was also well watered, as mentioned in Genesis chapter 2, verse 10. However, he ignored the fact that the cities of Sodom were known for its wickedness. In essence, Lot chose to get close to sin for material gain. So he made his choice, and he journeying eastward towards Sodom and Gomorrah. Lesson we learn here is that man's tendency is to choose economic benefits over blessings from God. Well, God allowed Lot to make his choice. God teaches his people what is good and what isn't, and he allows them to make their choices. Side note: some people think the historical account of Sodom and Gomorrah is just a fairy tale and not real. Let me give you a piece of interesting facts about Sodom and Gomorrah, and you decide whether these stories are true or false. Well, Sodom is identified in Scripture with Gomorrah and the cities of the plain. We'll see that in verse 10 all the way to chapter 14, verse 12. Sodom was known for its moral wickedness. The ancient site has not yet been clearly identified, but is thought to be possibly submerged or under the water of the Dead Sea, south of El Lisan Peninsula. I'll show you the map. In what was originally the Valley of Sidon. So you look at the left of the map, there's a little triangle. It shows you where is it located, and also the right of the map show you the current name of those locations. And there's also a salt mountain at the southwestern end of the Dead Sea called Mount of Sodom, or the language called Jebel Ustam. And I'll show you the picture as well. More interesting discoveries by these two archaeologists. William Albright in 1924 and Paul Lapp in 1965 to 1967. They were digging around there and they discovered an enormous cemetery with over 20,000 tombs and several 100,000 burials. And they verified that there was once a large population in this area, and somehow it ceased to exist after the 21st century BC, which is around 4,000 years ago, about the time of Abraham. And there were also some clay tablets discovered at Ebla, this place called Tel Madaik in Syria, to prove that there was once a thriving civilization. And they don't know. They couldn't find any reason why this civilization ceased to exist. But we know, right? From the Bible, history, we know. And we're going to talk about this in chapter 19. Let's read on, verse 14 to 18. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, "Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring can be counted. Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you." So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron. And there he built an altar to the Lord. So here in this passage, God told Abram, I am giving it to you. God was granting a large piece of land to Abram and his descendants. So was this really just a gift, or was there any string attached to this gift? Well, I'm going to give you some cultural background so to enhance our understanding. It is common for ancient governments to make agreements with one another, and there are two types of agreements. The first type is political treaties. They are agreements between two governments. The bigger, stronger government will protect the weaker one. But the weaker government in exchange had to bring gifts like gold, silver, or other resources to the stronger and the bigger government. And then the second kind of agreement is called royal grants. It is a grant bestowed from the government or the king, usually lands, to individuals or whoever that was loyal to them. And here is an example of this royal grant. Well, Abraham was actually quite familiar with these two types of agreement, and he recognized what is happening here. The royal grant was introduced in the last chapter, chapter 12. And here is repeated again and will be formally become official in chapter 15. What God offered to Abram was long term. He said, I will give you and your offspring, that means many generations. It says forever, all the land that you see. Abram wouldn't have to do anything make this happen. God said, I will give it to you. This is actually the second time, as I mentioned, God spoke to Abram about this promise. The last chapter, when he just left his country Ur, and here again. But here, God added some more details. He described the land in its dimension, as well as Abram's numerous descendants. Promised that Abram's descendant would be as numerous as the dust of the earth. That means you can't count it. The passage said God told Abram to walk the length and the breadth of the land. He is essentially calling Abram to lay a legal claim to this piece of land. And after God spoke to Abram moved southward to Hebron and settled near this oak grove that belonged to a Canaanite called Mamre. Again, what did Abram do? He built an altar. He dedicated himself and all that he had to the Lord. Do you see the difference between Abram and Lot? Lot pitched his tent in Sodom, but Abram built an altar in the promised land. A notable difference in the two men. One trapped himself in the environment of this fallen world, and the other focused himself on God. No wonder Paul called Abram the father of faith. And if we put our faith in God, we are also considered to be Abram's real children and will receive the same blessing as him. Remember in this passage I just read, God promised Abram's descendant would be as numerous as the dust. Well, it came true. His descendants are the Jews through Isaac, the Arabs through Ishmael, and us, those of us who put our trust in God. Let's read this passage so we know what Paul actually said. This is recorded in Galatians 3, verse 6 to 9. In the same way, Abraham believed God, and God counted him as righteous because of his faith. The real children of Abraham then are those who put their faith in God. What's more, the scriptures look forward to this time when God will make the Gentiles, meaning those non-Jews, right in his sight because of their faith. God proclaimed this good news to Abraham long ago when he said, all nations will be blessed through you. So all who put their faith in Christ share the same blessing Abraham received because of his faith. Isn't this fantastic? So, after reading this chapter, what does it tell us about God's character? God desires us to be loyal to him, to obey the good value he has instructed to us. And the reward is his blessing. Do you know blessing means happiness? However, he does not force this value or principle upon us. He let us choose. But remember that our choices have spiritual consequences, like Lot. And we'll see what happened to Lot in the next chapters. Second question. So what does this chapter tell us about humanity? The natural tendency for men and women is to look for things or situations that would benefit themselves. However, looking out for ourselves is not wrong, but it would become wrong when we exchange it for God's value. Third question. What does this chapter tell us of how we should live? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were called by God to travel to places where they had no home, no family, no history. These travels call our attention to the obedience of these patriots. They serve as example for all God's people who are faithfully journeying to their true heavenly home. In this journey, although God promises blessings, but there are choices that we have to make. And the safe choice would always goes along with what God's principle of righteousness is. Happy Sabbath, and we'll see you next Friday.